Thanks very much. Well, it's good to be with you guys again. I enjoyed the chance to be with you a couple of years ago when I talked about my Hollywood Stars book. And the talk tonight, the topic is the Almost Jackie, Kenny Washington and the Integration of Baseball. This is from my new book that's just come out, Walking Alone, The Untold Journey, the Football Pioneer, Kenny Washington. And if a few of you are giving me the Rodney look right now, saying, wait a minute, that's a picture of a football guy, and he's talking to football subjects, I get it. I understand this is a baseball organization, so we're good. No worries. We're going to get into baseball, but a little bit of football first. We start off with, who was Kenny Washington? A lot of people that I've touched base with on this subject have never really heard of him and are really surprised when they do. But I'm going to let Groucho Marx jump in here and tell you just who Kenny Washington was.
For those who don't follow football, this is one of the legendary names in the game. No, this one. This is Mr. Washington, the first man to ever throw $1 across the Potomac River.
And one of the reasons that Groucho mentioned that, he was a huge sports fan. Kenny Washington may have been the greatest football player to ever play. And that's coming from Hall of Fame guys that saw him play. That's not my evaluation. He had the speed to run outside and run away from defenders. He had the strength and power to run off tackle and over linebackers. But what Groucho kind of alluded to, Kenny Washington could throw a football 100 yards in the air. He could throw it the length of the field. He had an amazing arm. That's a toss to Jackie Robinson for a touchdown in the Washington State game in 1939. But again, we're here to talk a little bit of baseball. A little background, though, on the legacy of Kenny Washington. He is best known as the Jackie Robinson of the NFL. He integrated the National Football League in 1946. Technically, he reintegrated the NFL in 1946. There were African Americans in the game up through 1933. And he played 3 seasons with the Los Angeles Rams, and it was really at the end of his football career. In college, he played at UCLA. He was UCLA's first ever first-team All-American. He led the Bruins to their first undefeated season in 1939, and UCLA has only had 2 undefeated seasons. The other came in the early 1950s, if I remember right. And he was the first UCLA athlete in any sport to have his number, the number 13, retired. He was the winner of the 1939 Fairbanks Award. And what's interesting about that is that he was the only unanimous winner in the award's history. Now, a little bit of background. The Fairbanks Award preceded the Heisman Trophy. And while the Heisman was voted on by the media, the Fairbanks Award was voted on by college football players. All 1,600 had a vote in this. And in 1939, Kenny Washington was the unanimous winner and the only unanimous winner in the history of that award. And he was ironically not a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. He did carry the West Coast votes, but not the rest of the country. He was immensely popular in Los Angeles, the most popular athlete in Los Angeles. So much so, Joe E. Brown wore Kenny Washington's UCLA uniform in the movie he did, $1,000 a touchdown. He was so popular when he came out of UCLA that the Pupkin brothers and their company, $1 Million Productions, wrote a motion picture for Kenny to star in, While Thousands Cheer. And the Pupkin brothers wrote produced films, all black casts for black audiences. And this was the first sports film they did. And they actually signed Kenny to do a couple of more films down the road, but they never came to pass. But this, from by all accounts, this film did very well. But we're here to talk baseball. And I'm going to go back to Groucho, and he's going to tell us how that comes into the equation.
Were you active in other sports besides football when you were in college?
Yes, Groucho. I played baseball. In fact, I believe that truly was my first love.
Indeed, it was. He first made headlines in 1934 at Lincoln High School in Los Angeles. And that spring, these 2 schools, Fremont High and Lincoln High, were the 2 baseball powers in Los Angeles. They were battling it out for the city championship. Fremont High they were the perennial power, multi-time city champions, and their program sent a lot of players into professional baseball over the years. Lincoln High, they were better known for academics. They were best known really for their drama program. They sent a lot of great actors into the profession. Robert Young, a baseball teammate of Kenny Washington's, his name was Robert Meservey. When he got out of school and got into acting, he dropped the last name, went by his first and middle name, Robert Preston, more famous as the Music Man. So they had a number of really successful actors come out of that school, but 34, 35, 36, Kenny's 3 seasons, Lincoln High was a real baseball power. Now in 34, these two schools were powered by 15-year-old freshmen. They were their best players, and they were the 2 best players in the city. For Fremont High, it was their third baseman, Bobby Dorr. For Lincoln High, it was their shortstop, Kenny Washington. And these two 15-year-olds dueled for the city batting title. Bobby Dorr eked it out over Kenny Washington. Washington, though, won the home run title. And they didn't get to settle the city championship on the field because of a polio outbreak in Los Angeles, and the health department canceled all public gatherings. So the high school baseball season was stopped with a couple of weeks to go. Fremont was in the lead. Ironically, Lincoln High had suffered an upset loss a day before the health department issued their decree. So they ended up finishing second. But the next year, Bobby Dorr was gone. Kenny Washington had a tremendous junior year, and Lincoln High won the city title, their only city title in baseball in the school's history. He then moved on to UCLA and only played 1 year of baseball at UCLA. He was the starting shortstop on the Bruins team in 1938. He did not play as a freshman because they couldn't round up enough players to make up a freshman team in 37. So instead, Kenny threw the shot put in track and competed in boxing. 38, he played baseball. 39, the football coaches got him a real well-paying job working at Warner Brothers in the motion picture studio. And so he chose not to play baseball and to make some money instead. He was the first African-American to play baseball at UCLA. And he was the all-league shortstop for the Bruins that year. And in a game at Stanford University, Stanford played at Sunken Diamond, which is still the home of the Stanford Cardinals. And in a game there in early April, Kenny hit this home run into the trees in right center field. And they said it was the first time that a right-handed hitter had hit an opposite field home run there. The park played very big. And they estimated that the ball traveled 450 feet. And for decades after, it was touted as being the longest home run ever hit at Stanford's park. San Francisco Examiner sports editor in a column about Kenny that spring wrote, leading hitter, best shortstop in college baseball out our way is Kenny Washington of UCLA. Coaches of other teams say he has major league ability, but big league scouts are not interested in him. Washington is a Negro. What was interesting is whenever UCLA and the University of California met up in league play, the gang got a lot of added publicity. And the reason for that was these two players. They were not only the best baseball player on their team, but in the fall, both had been the best player on their school's football team. Washington, Sam Chapman, Chapman an outfielder at Cal. And in league play, Washington finished second in conference in hitting. He led through most of the season, got a bad case of the flu with about 3 weeks to go, spent a few nights in the hospital, ended up with a 409 average in league play and finished second, led the league in home runs. Sam Chapman finished 14th in the league in hitting with a 340 average. When the season ended, Sam Chapman signed with the Philadelphia A's and went straight to the big leagues, went right into their outfield, had an 11-year career, never spent a day in the minor leagues, MVP votes in 1941, and in 1946 was an all-star. So kind of gives you a little bit of a gauge about Kenny's abilities on the diamond. 1939, Jackie Robinson transferred in from Pasadena Junior College. He and Kenny shared spots in the UCLA football backfield. They became great friends. And Kenny was really a mentor to Jackie. Jackie had a real volatile temper. And Kenny would take him on long walks and really counsel him about curbing his emotions and controlling his temper. And they were really close friends. And it continued. Many people that I spoke with said that once Jackie settled in Connecticut, when he was with the Brooklyn Dodgers, he really lost communication with a lot of his friends from Los Angeles. But when Kenny was in the NFL with the Rams, they would get together when the Rams came into New York, and they maintained their friendship for many, many years. Interesting comparison, because like Kenny, Jackie played only one season of baseball at UCLA. That was in his junior year in 1940. And Kenny, in his lone season with UCLA, for the entire season, hit 397. Jackie, in his lone season at UCLA, hit 097. And it's often been said that of the four sports he participated in at UCLA, baseball was probably Jackie's worst. He was the NCAA champion in the long jump. Had the 1940 Olympics not been canceled, likely would have won a gold medal. He was the leading scorer in the conference in basketball and was a second-team All-American as a running back in football. Tremendous athlete. Interesting, Kenny talked about, he was asked about at one time, his greatest thrill in sports. And of course, he still to this day holds the Rams franchise record for the longest touchdown run from scrimmage, a 92-yard run against the Cardinals. In college football, after his last game, he got a 10-minute standing ovation from 103,000 fans in the Coliseum. But he said that it was something he did in this park that really was his greatest thrill. And this is Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, the first named Wrigley Field. Of course, William Wrigley, who at the time owned the Cubs, had this park built in 1925, pretty comparable replica to the Wrigley Field in Chicago. And what they would do in Los Angeles in the wintertime, and this spanned for about 20 years through the 30s and the 40s, they had a winter league, and it would start 10 days after the conclusion of the World Series. And what was unique too about it, it was an integrated winter league. They had players from the Negro League, the American League, the National League, and the Pacific Coast League. They would open it with an all-star exhibition game. And for the first several years, it was played in Wrigley Field there in Los Angeles. And what the organizer would do, this all-star game would have an all-black team against an all-white team, and they would bring in a headliner. And in 1939, that headliner was Bob Feller, who pitched for the all-white team. Ted Williams was the headliner in 1941. Drew pretty good crowds, as you can see, into Wrigley Field. And then in 1942, Satchel Paige was invited, and there was a lot of enthusiasm in the press in Los Angeles for his impending arrival. But just days before the game, he sent a telegram and had to withdraw. He had pitched every single game of the Negro World Series and said that his arm was sore and he was tired and he couldn't come. So they were scrambling to find a headliner that they could replace him with, and they reached out to Kenny Washington. Now, Kenny had not played organized baseball in 4 years, and they plugged him in at second base and hit him third in the lineup. And in the bottom of the first inning, he came up, and Larry French, who that summer had gone 14-5 and pitched in the All-Star game for the Brooklyn Dodgers, 2 scoreless innings in the All-Star game, French was on the mound. And Kenny's first at-bat, he drove the ball into the last row of the bleachers in right center field for a long home run. And he called that his greatest thrill in sports. Rod Dedeaux, who was a reserve in that game, later went on to a legendary career as the head baseball coach at the University of Southern California, recalled that afternoon and said Washington could really slug the ball. French just stood there shaking his head. Kenny and baseball integration efforts. Well, 3 times during his life, Kenny was at the center of efforts to integrate the game of baseball. First came in 1940, and these ranged from kind of the innocent to the pretty serious. The innocent one was in 1940. It was just 3 weeks after Kenny had played his last college football game. And Larry McPhail, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, liked to come out to Southern California every January for the opening of the horse racing season. And he would get together with some of his baseball buddies, particularly Fred Haney, then the manager of the St. Louis Browns. And they would go out to Santa Anita and hobnob with the movie stars and take in the horse races. Well, a pretty savvy reporter in Los Angeles found out about this, and he used his column in one of the papers to write an open letter to Larry McPhail. And he wrote, I'm writing you this letter because I consider you far and away the most brilliant mogul. That'll get his attention, right? And then he added, you've been looking for a heavy-hitting outfielder. Let me tell you about Kenny. You certainly can use him. And then he said, baseball needs new vitality, new faces. Let's stop being ostriches. If I can go back. Darn it. Anyway, he urged him to sign him, but as we learned later, Larry McPhail, when his papers later became public, Larry McPhail was the last guy that was going to work to integrate baseball. In 1943, obviously, the country was at war. Some of the biggest name players in the game were serving in the military, and this trickled all the way through all of professional baseball. Minor league teams at every level lost players to the military. Whole leagues went out of business. And in the Pacific Coast League, you had clubs that were really struggling to find players. And when the Los Angeles Angels and the Hollywood Stars went public and were complaining that they had trouble finding players, the editors of 3 black newspapers in Los Angeles got together and they approached both teams. And they said they had a solution to their problem, and that they could fill a hole in their roster if they were to sign Kenny Washington. And they really pushed it hard. And they also gave these teams a list of Negro League players who happened to be working at the aircraft factories and the munitions factories in the Los Angeles area, with a suggestion that they could be available to play nights or weekends or around their work hours. And Hollywood, their manager, Charlie Root, he rejected the idea out of hand, had no interest in doing it. But Pants Rowland, who was running the Los Angeles Angels, had a whole different approach. And he said he would give Kenny Washington a look in spring training. This was in 1943. They got word to Washington, and then they sat by the phone and waited and waited and waited. And the invitation never came. And when one of the sports editors contacted Rowland about it, he said, well, I took it to Bill Sweeney, our manager, and Bill Sweeney was not interested. He thinks we'll be fine with the players we've got. They then went to the Board of Supervisors, who were really outraged at the rejection of Washington by the Stars and by the Angels. And they urged that baseball integrate. And in their statement, they said the Pacific Coast League, where no discrimination, the Pacific Coast, where no discrimination exists, not in their hotels or seats in the ballpark, would be an ideal spot to begin a movement, which now keeps some of the nation's finest athletes from participating in the national sport. Such a fine prospect as Kenny Washington, who played football with distinction for UCLA, is effectively barred from playing baseball, the speaker said. Supervisors unanimously voted a resolution deploring the discrimination and asking baseball moguls to put an end to it. Obviously, they didn't at that time, and the 3 newspapers got together and organized a protest outside of Wrigley Field Memorial Day weekend, when the Angels and the Hollywood Stars met up for their series. In 1945, we know that history was changed. History was made. Baseball changed. October 23rd, at the direction of Branch Rickey, the Montreal Royals signed Jackie Robinson. And Rickey said at that time that Robinson was not going to be the only one, that he was going to sign 2 black players. And Jackie urged him to sign Kenny Washington. And Jackie told reporters that Kenny is going to play baseball next year. Wendell Smith, a legendary sports writer at the Pittsburgh Courier, was a confidant of Branch Rickey's. And he sent Rickey a letter reminding him that he was going to sign a second black player. And with that reminder added, I am suggesting very seriously that you consider Kenny Washington. I understand he is much better than Robinson. In fact, kind of ironic, in the Kansas City paper, one of the Kansas City Monarchs, one of the partners in the ownership group, went public and was very angry at Branch Rickey for signing Jackie Robinson away from the Monarchs. And a columnist there wrote, get over it. In fact, sign Kenny Washington instead. You'll find out that he's better. But during that whole process, the Dodgers did not reach out and make contact with Kenny until the last week of January. And Kenny's response publicly later, he said, I answered no because I had other plans. So what were those other plans? Well, about 10 days earlier, the Rams had declared they were leaving Cleveland and moving the franchise to Los Angeles. And their general manager, Chili Walsh, flew into Los Angeles to negotiate a lease to play in the Los Angeles Coliseum. And at that meeting, Hallie Harding, sports editor of the Los Angeles Sentinel, an African-American paper, stood up and in protest and said, taxpayers paid for this stadium, and blacks were among those taxpayers. And we urge you not to grant a lease to a team and a league that refuses to allow blacks to play. And Chili Walsh got up and said, we have no such policy, to which Harding responded, an unwritten policy is just as forceful as a written policy. And Walsh's response was, we'll sign Kenny Washington. And that is why he did not go with Jackie and the Dodgers, because the next day, Chili Walsh sent the team's publicity director over to Washington's home, and Washington secretly agreed to a contract with the Rams, but they did not make it official, publicly official, until March, when the Rams front office and coaching staff arrived in Los Angeles, and they arrived late one night, and the next morning was when they had their very first press conference in Los Angeles, and it was to announce the signing of Kenny Washington. And he said, as much as he wanted to play baseball, as much as that was his first love, he said, I had given the Rams my word, I could not go back on it. So they ended up signing Johnny Wright, the Dodgers did, and there was a lot of discussion within the organization. There was a lot of lobbying. Leo DeRocher was pushing for them to sign Roy Campanella, and others in the organization really liked what they had seen of Johnny Wright, Homestead Grays pitcher. They liked what they had seen of him pitching in the Army against major league players. And so Johnny Wright ended up being the second black player that the Dodgers signed to be with Jackie Robinson in Montreal for the 46th season. But it really wasn't long. Baseball always, for the 3 seasons Kenny was in the NFL, baseball always kind of loomed. It was always a topic around Kenny Washington. In 1946, Leo DeRocher leaked that the Brooklyn Dodgers were on the verge of signing Kenny Washington. DeRocher came to Los Angeles to be on the Milton Berle show, or take it back, I do that all the time, the Jack Benny show. And they had a dinner party at the Brown Derby restaurant the night before. And one of the reporters, John B. Old with the Los Angeles Express, waited around to try to get Leo. And he wanted him to talk about Jackie Robinson. And Leo changed the subject and instead talked about Kenny Washington and was really excited about him and said that the Dodgers planned to sign him. In November, he made that declaration, and this was in many, many newspapers for several weeks after. Like this note, you can expect an announcement any day now that Kenny Washington of the Rams has been signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers and will probably be assigned to Montreal for the 1947 season. But as spring training grew close, reporters really pressed DeRocher more and more on it. And finally, DeRocher said they were not going to sign Kenny because he had a bad knee. His knee was on the bum. And in December of 48, Kenny retired from football. And to elaborate on DeRocher's comment, in April, after his signing was announced, Kenny underwent major surgery on his left knee, minor surgery on his right knee. His 1946 season with the Rams really was a wash. He was very unproductive. He was still recovering from that knee surgery. Showed flashes of his old brilliance in 47, but a lot of injuries in 48, and he elected at the end of the season to retire from football. As soon as he did, baseball jumped back into the picture. Bing Crosby was a part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he immediately extended an offer to Washington to join the Pirates and to come to spring training with them. They were looking at him as a reserve outfielder and a pinch hitter. And in addition to the Pirates, the San Diego Padres of the Pacific Coast League offered him a contract. They had integrated the Coast League in 48. John Ritchie on the right, the catcher, a San Diego native, was signed and became the first African-American in the Pacific Coast League. 49, Bill Veeck assigned Minnie Minoso and Luke Easter to the club. And they wanted Kenny Washington to be part of that club as well. And Kenny told them that he had already made commitments to act in 3 movies. So in 1949, he appeared opposite Burt Lancaster in Rope of Sand. He appeared as a doctor in a very, very acclaimed and very controversial movie called Pinky. Jean Crane starred. She was nominated for an Academy Award, as was Ethel Barrymore. And Kenny had a terrific role in that film. He was personally chosen by Darryl F. Zanuck, the head of the studio, for that role. And then he had a small part in his buddy Jackie Robinson's film, The Jackie Robinson Story. He played a coach with a very, very minor, brief speaking part in that film. But he declared that once he was through with these 3 movies, he was going to focus on baseball. And he spent a couple of months at a park near his home with some semi-pro players taking batting practice and fielding balls every day for 2 solid months. And at the end of that time, just as spring training was about to begin, Leo DeRocher reached out again. This time he was managing the Giants, and the New York Giants signed Kenny Washington and brought him into spring training in Phoenix in 1950. It was a big, big story, particularly in the black press. Kenny was an icon, and the idea of him jumping into baseball really generated headlines around the country. But he had a lot of obstacles facing him. He was 31 years old. He was the oldest rookie in any spring training camp. And he was coming off 5 knee surgeries. Sorry, I clicked that a little too quickly. And he hadn't played baseball. He hadn't played competitive baseball in 5 years. In terms of the Giants, well, Leo had pretty much declared that 7 of his 8 position spots were set. The only competition was going to be for the right field spot. And he had 8 outfielders competing for 7 outfield spots, and Kenny was among them. And he was going to battle Monty Irvin and Don Mueller for the right field job that spring. Their very first inter-squad game, Washington was one of the stars, hit a tape measure home run. And so when they went to Tucson to play Cleveland in their first exhibition series, Kenny Washington was the starting right fielder for the New York Giants. And it was an all-black outfield of Monty Irvin, Hank Thompson, and Kenny Washington. Cleveland had 4 African-American starters in that game, and it got national notoriety. A lot of writers were suggesting this was the most black players that had been on an American or National League field at one time. After that weekend, Kenny did not hit well. He was assigned to the Giants B team, and a majority of their B team games were against Pacific Coast League clubs, and he did fairly well in those games. I mean, he had hits in almost every one of the games. And then the last week of spring training, the Giants went on the road. They left Arizona. The A team went to Central and Northern California with the Pittsburgh Pirates for 4 games. The B team went to the Southern California area, and they had a game in Palm Springs with the Seattle Rainiers of the Pacific Coast League. They went to Burbank to play the St. Louis Browns. They had a game in the San Diego area against the Marine Corps. And then in Los Angeles, they played the University of Southern California. And in that game with USC, Kenny Washington hit a grand slam and a 2-run triple, 6 RBIs in the afternoon. And the next day, Leo sat him down and delivered bad news. And Leo told the press, make no mistake about it, Kenny can really wrap that ball. Nobody has worked any harder in camp than Kenny. I was disappointed in his throwing. Football must have tightened up his arm and shoulder muscles. So the Giants offered him the opportunity. They wanted him to go to their farm club at Jersey City, but Kenny declined. He said if he was going to play in the minors, that he would prefer, since he had a young family, to be on the West Coast. And so DeRocher made some calls to Coast League clubs on Kenny's behalf, and Kenny Washington signed with the Los Angeles Angels. His signing took place the night prior to opening day, and they had their ball club pretty well set. So for the first couple of weeks of the season, he was principally used as a pinch hitter. But they had an injury situation arise, and also Bill Kelly, the manager, was not happy at all with the play of the guys he had been plugging in at third base. And so Kenny was made the third baseman for the Angels. And he got in a couple of starts. His third game at third base for the Angels, he was badly spiked, covering the bag on a stolen base attempt, took him out of action. And in the Coast League at that time, they could go with unlimited roster sizes up till May 1. And then by May 1, they had to be down to 22. The Angels were well over the limit. And so they talked to Kenny, and he was not hitting. He struggled with the curveball. And they told him that they really just felt he needed to knock the rust off of his game. And they wanted him to go to one of their lower level clubs and just kind of get his hitting going. And Kenny had told them that he wanted to give this a month. And if he wasn't helping the ball club at the end of a month, that he would walk away from it. That's what he elected to do, to retire from baseball and from all professional sports. He then moved into business. He was in the wholesale liquor business, was an executive for the largest wholesale liquor distributor in the Los Angeles area, Young's Market, and then went on to be an executive with the largest Scotch whiskey distributor in the U.S., and then the largest Scotch whiskey importer in the U.S. In 1956, Kenny Washington was inducted into the National Football Foundation Hall of Fame. And when the Dodgers came west following the 57 season, Walter O'Malley reached out to Washington and recruited him as an advisor. And he asked him from a business standpoint to help the Dodgers to prompt ticket sales into the African-American community, but also the scouting department wanted Washington's help as well. And in 1963, the most coveted amateur player in the country was a Los Angeles high school outfielder by the name of Willie Crawford. And there's been stories over the years, some of you may have heard them, that Tommy Lasorda gets a lot of credit. He was a young scout with the Dodgers, and Tommy gets a lot of credit for landing Willie Crawford. Well, I found interesting articles where Crawford's family members said it was Kenny Washington, that Kenny Washington reached out and many occasions invited Willie and his family to come to Dodger games, and he entertained them in the stadium club. And then ultimately he turned it over to the two area scouts, Kenny Myers and Tommy Lasorda. But the family always said that it was the relationship they built with Kenny Washington that prompted Willie Crawford to choose to sign with the Dodgers, even though other clubs offered him much more money. Kenny's own son, Kenny Jr., was a standout baseball player at the University of Southern California, played in the College World Series on a national championship team, and was all tournament. He was all College World Series 9 as the left fielder. Signed with the Dodgers, reached the AAA level, never cracked the big leagues in the US, but he did go over to Japan and played part of a season in the Japanese league. Kenny passed in 1971 at the young age of 52, suffered from a very rare heart-lung disease, spent time at Johns Hopkins, spent time in hospitals in New York and in Los Angeles, but it was an incurable heart-lung disease that took his life in 1971. This plaque is in the Los Angeles Coliseum. And Jackie Robinson, at a speech in 1959 to the NAACP, spoke of his friend Kenny Washington. And he said, when you talk about the great players of all time and you forget Kenny Washington, you're forgetting the greatest. And on that note, before I jump into questions and answers, a question that often comes up: where can you get the book if you're so inclined? Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com have it. And the publisher is Roman and Littlefield, and they're not too far from you. They're in Virginia, and their website is roman.com. But if any of you would want a signed copy, I can knock a little bit of the price off, and with media shipping rate, that'll bring the total cost to $40. And you can either reach out to me at my email or use that email to reach my PayPal account. And I'd be happy to make that offer to you guys. And I thank you very much. And I hope you're all awake.
We're here. Good job, Dan. Very, very interesting. I know very little about Kenny Washington, so that was refreshing.
Thank you.
Not thrilled with our turnout tonight, but it is August and it's vacation season.
Absolutely.
And it is, I'm downtown Baltimore, a mile from the ballpark, and it's about 89 here right now. So it's not the worst it's been, but it's still fairly oppressive.
Sure.
But we did sweep today at the Texas Rangers, so I'm grateful for that.
Well, I was sorry to see Mancini traded this week.
Yeah, that's the general
He had a
consensus.
home run today. Did you know he had a home run today?
Did he
he?
really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but he'll be a free agent. You never know. He may come back. Who knows?
Wouldn't that be great?
So,
Cinderella story.
I'm inspired by them signing, getting the Rays outfielder, the fun guy, Brent Murphy is his name?
Phillips.
Phillips.
Brett
Brent Phillips, yeah.
A lifetime 190 hitter.
But he won the second game, the Royals, the Tampa Bay's second victory in the 2020 World Series against the Dodgers with the game-winning walk-off hit, in which he masqueraded as an airplane running around the field after he scored. I'll never forget that.
Well, he was a very popular guy down there. So.
Dan, how long did it take you to do this book versus
Oh my goodness!
your last one on the stars?
You know, the idea kind of came up not long after I finished the book on the stars, and so I kind of got into researching it. A good friend of mine, Artie Harris, who was one of the scouts of the movie Moneyball, ironically, Artie, it was a UCLA guy, and we got talking about. We were talking about Jackie Robinson, and Kenny was telling about people that when he was at UCLA in the 60s, there were still some professors who had been there in the late 30s. And these guys were adamant that Kenny was far better than Jackie. And I'd heard of Kenny, but, you know, like you guys, I didn't know much about him. I took a dive into doing the research and was just amazed at what I found. It was very challenging. You know, you're not going to find many people who are still around, you know, when Kenny played. A friend of mine who does a military history podcast actually found one of Kenny's 1939 football teammates in a senior facility in Santa Barbara. He was 104, and he insisted to me the guy was really sharp and would make for a good interview. But unfortunately, before we could connect, he passed away. Kind of a funny aside, I spoke to the daughter of the quarterback on the 39 UCLA team. And when we started chatting, she said, well, I really never talked football with Dad. Her dad, Ned Matthews, also was an original 49er. And she said, my husband talked football. Let me put him on. And he came on and he said, you've talked to B, haven't you? And I'm thinking, B? Who's B? And he said, well, that's Ned's wife. And I said, my God, she's got to be. And before I could say, he said, right, she's 102.
Oh my
And I
God.
said, and how is she? And he said, she's phenomenal. And she was. I called her right away, and it was an amazing conversation. I never would have guessed by this voice on the phone. In fact, she laughed. She said, she made me laugh. She said, excuse me if my voice is a little scratchy. I've been sitting here eating chocolate. That's exactly what I want to be doing at 102. Please. But she was great. There was one story that I had heard about, that Kenny and Jackie, the 39 UCLA football team had 5 African-American players. There were only 12 schools in the country that were integrated in 1939. Their football teams were integrated, and they all, the other 11 only had a one player, and UCLA had 5. And so some of these players and some of the white players, they went into a restaurant in Palo Alto the night before their game with Stanford, and they were refused service. And Ned Matthews, as I had heard the story, Ned Matthews piped up and said, they don't eat, we don't eat. Come on, guys, let's go. And when I put that story to B, she really lit up and she said, yes, Ned talked about that. That was my Nettie. That happened. And we had a very interesting conversation. I also tracked down the 2 daughters of the coach of the 39 UCLA team, Babe Harrell. One was 93, the other was 92. And they were tremendous. They talked about being around the team, Kenny being their favorite, their dad having all the players over to the house for ice cream and whatnot. And they talked about how they would go to meet their dad after practice, and they would all run to Kenny, that he was real popular. And they were an interesting duo because they were just amazing. Their memories were great. They were very enthusiastic, sharing the stories. We're really excited to hear that Kenny's story was finally going to be told. And one of them said to me very early in the conversation, said, forgive me, I'm in a little bit of discomfort. She said, I fractured my elbow the other day playing tennis. So it was very challenging. But as challenging as it was a great challenge because I worked on it through the pandemic, through the lockdown. And that really helped my mental health, being focused on that and being able to work on that. So it was an interesting project and a very rewarding project.
For those of you guys going to the convention, I just looked it up. Roman and Littlefield will be there, so hopefully copies of Dan's book will be at their table. So
I will write to Kristen, who's the editor I work with, and she usually goes to SABR, so I will shoot her an email and make sure they put this book there.
yeah, they're listed on the exhibitors list. So
yeah, they're great.
Um,
Well, and
Speaking
congrats
of-
to all you guys are doing for the convention. I know it's a lot of work and it's been a crazy few years, but congratulations. That's great.
well, let's hopefully it turns out as we're not going to get the crowds we would have had there not been a pandemic.
Yeah.
So we're looking at somewhere 550. I'm guessing. There could be a lot of walk up business day passes, that kind of stuff. But in terms of the Orioles tickets for the for that Friday night game, we basically gave the Orioles the number. So we'll get more for people who come late.
Great.
I'm
reminding you.
Yeah, it's looking promising. But it's good. A lot of the people from SABR headquarters, I realized, I've never done a convention before because the staff has changed over there.
Yeah.
Past couple of years. So a lot of us are kind of running through the mud together for the first time.
Well, Scott Carter with SABR used to work for the ball club here, the Fresno Grizzlies. So say hello to him from Fresno.
Yeah, I've talked to him many times. I'll finally meet him in person. I've met Mr. Bush. He was actually out here in April or May, doing advanced scouting. So
Great, great. Wish I could be there, but it's a great event.
So, you guys have any other questions for Dan? He has a whole evening ahead of him. The rest of us can go to bed soon.
No, thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Yes, good.
This was
Very nice.
interesting. The Orioles already played their day game, so I don't have to watch anything tonight. So,
So this is your entertainment for the night?
Yeah, this was good. And I got we're off tomorrow, right, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I'm gonna go to all 3 Pirates games this weekend, assuming none are rained out.
I'm going up to Harrisburg to see Bowie play tomorrow.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to go to a game at Richmond, not against Bowie, but to see. I've never been to Richmond before the season's over. So
Is Richmond down to AA?
Richmond's been AA now for about a decade. They're San Francisco.
Really? Okay. I just remember passing their stadium one time, and I knew it was AAA at that time.
Yeah, it was Braves AAA, and then it was empty for a year or two, and then it's AA for the Giants.
Is it the same stadium the Braves were in when they were AAA?
Yeah, it's called the Diamond. It's older. It's probably built in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
So I've never been there. I've been past it. So and then if everything works out and I'm tentatively going to see a game Astros and then the new Texas Rangers field.
Oh, great.
Potentially in October.
Great.
We'll see.
I haven't been in the new one, was in the old one, and hottest game I think I ever took in my life. So
I went in 2018 because I knew they were going to close in 19. So I didn't want to wait till last year in case something came up. So I went in 18 and I saw the Rangers' last home game of the season, and it ended up being Adrian Beltre's last home game ever. So
wow.
Yeah.
Great.
That was a nice experience. So
I got there. The Indians opened up the season in Texas. It's either in 17 or 18. So that's one of the few parks I hadn't been to. So I was able to get to that. And I remember toward the end of the game, I know Arlington's sort of halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth. So I went to the top of the ballpark, walked around it, and I wanted to see if I could see downtown Dallas and downtown Fort Worth ballpark. And you can.
You can see both the skylines.
Yeah, I did that too. In fact.
Yeah,
I was there when Nelson Cruz was still with the Orioles.
Wow.
The skylines are. Dallas has a higher skyline than Fort Worth does, obviously.
That's for sure.
Then I had to go downtown Dallas to the Dealey Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd been there before.
A lot of people I talk to about that don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, that's because
that dates us. Boy, that really dates us.
Well, yeah.
It was also when I was there, I made the road trip because I was going to try to see a day game, and it was raining. So I did a day trip. I went to Oklahoma City, and I went to the Memorial and Museum.
Oh, yeah.
So, which was quite sobering experience. So, like Jeff, remember we went to the one in Shanksville on the way back from Pittsburgh.
Yes, yeah. You know, the following year they were finishing that tower out on the road at the entrance. I might like to go back in there and see it's a tower that rings a certain amount of times. And it was under construction at that time.
Right.
You know, when I was in Shanksville, probably a week after the 9/11,
Oh,
driving back to Cleveland, and took a detour. And it's really not Shanksville. The site is actually in Lambertville, Pennsylvania. And there was nothing there. It was just off in the distance, you could see obviously where the plane crashed. It was just all dirt, an open dirt. And there was like people from, I guess, all over just making memorials just on putting a fence post up or these spontaneous things. And I took a couple of photographs at the time because I'm thinking this has got to be historical.
But it's really fixed up nice now. That's big
Yeah.
memorial.
I went back about 10 years ago and they really, they obviously got money to build a regular mall.
They even have recordings of the people calling from the plane to their loved ones, saying goodbye. They even have that on recordings.
Yeah, I lived a mile from the Pentagon when it got hit, so I smelled the fire
Oh my gosh, that's true.
for days.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Were you home? Did you hear it happen?
I didn't hear it. I was actually at the job I had at the time. I was in north part of the county, but then Washington D.C. was being evacuated, so everything was bottlenecked everywhere. And so I actually walked home, and Route 50 was a parking lot of everybody escaping, getting out of the city. And I literally lived on Columbia Pike, which ended at the Pentagon, and all the military personnel were just walking west, as far away as they could, away from the disaster site with like the stunned looks on their faces. It was, yeah. So, but I guess that's about it.
Okay.
Dan, thank you.
Oh, thanks for the invitation.
Yes,
Nice to
that
be
was
with you
a
guys.
very nice presentation.
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed that.
Hopefully Jacob will
Yeah,
have this up
sure.
in a couple days. Was this your first presentation for SABR?
With this book, yes.
Okay, good.
So you
All
guys,
right.
you guys took
We
my
don't-
my
We don't mind being a guinea
virginity.
pig. So,
Sounds great.
so you guys have a good night, and I'll see
Just
a
with a
couple of you
convention.
guys
Thanks a lot.
in person in a few weeks here in Baltimore.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I'll be
Oh,
sending
yeah,
out
definitely.
emails about the Aberdeen game again, probably later this week.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
good night. Take care.
Thank you,
Good night.
Dan. Good night.